Tristan Kumar's Dying Planet, The Season of Chaos. Narrated by Tristan Kumar. Part 27. No Man's Land. I raised my gun toward Rye to set my plan into action, but another man stopped me. "We're not here to kill the kids ourselves, lady," he said. I scowled at him from underneath the bandana. Meanwhile, the man with the briefcase set it down and opened it. Inside, there was a glowing red cube. He typed some buttons into a panel next to it, and it started a minute-long countdown. The children started to scream, but the man who had stopped me raised his gun at them. "Go! I'll come in a second," he yelled to us. The man who had set the briefcase ran out, but I stayed. I wasn't done here. The roof began to rumble from all of the shooting, and the guard threatening the kids got distracted. A kid ran up to him and grabbed a brick. He raised his gun at him, and the kid smashed his head into a whiteboard. He fell to the ground. I watched as the savior kid signaled for the other kids to run out. I pointed my gun at the floor and shot. The kids screamed and ran back to the wall. "You're not getting out of here," I told the kids. I looked over to the person who had been hit on the whiteboard. He wasn't breathing. I stepped forward and looked at the time left on the bomb. 36. I looked at the kids, thinking if I should do this. When the time reached 26, I decided that I needed to do this to accomplish my goal, no matter how many people got in my way. I continued to point my gun at the kids while I slowly walked back toward the door. I walked out of the room and closed the door. I heard the kids immediately get up and run to the door. I held the door closed as I banged on the door. They started screaming and crying. 15. It wasn't too late to let them go. I could still redeem myself and become better than who I was now. 8. My hands trembled as the kids screamed louder and louder. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I stepped away from the door as the door swung open. The kids toppled on one another as the countdown reached 0. I watched as Rye looked at me. His eyes sparkled with tears. The bomb exploded and the children were engulfed in flames. I winced in pain as I ran to the stairwell and jumped down the stairs. I landed on my legs and looked around. The ceiling where the room above cracked and lava started to flow toward me. I turned around and ran out. The cop cars and fire trucks waited outside, watching as the bomb went off. I quickly snuck past them, and suddenly the ground shook. I fell to the ground and turned around. The red beam shot into the sky. I watched in anticipation as it flew further and further. But something was wrong. As the usual story went, there was supposed to be something that redirected it toward the sun, but there was nothing there. What was going on? It continued to go up and eventually stopped. The sky remained red, but the beam was gone. Suddenly, I saw a thin white line stretch across the sky, like cracks in glass. It eventually became bigger and bigger. Eventually, it completely cracked open and revealed an entire new reality of stars and planets. It was like our universe, but rearranged. Suddenly, I knew what was going on. I reached back into my pocket and pulled out a black disc. I placed it on my chest, and my suit quickly formed around my body. I equipped my black helmet with a white streak across my eyes. I placed my fingers on my helmet and looked to see what had caused the gap. As I zoomed in more to see what was flying across the sky, I could see 2 figures quickly moving across. Eventually, I could see someone young in a black suit dragging another figure in a white suit across the sky. I stared at them and scowled. I woke up to President Jones shaking me. I opened my eyes. Sylvie was still laying next to me. I looked around. It was still dark, but then again we were inside a dimly lit room. "What?" I asked him. "I think I know how I can get you to Sylvie, the other one," he said. "Come outside when you're ready." He started to walk away when I mumbled, "Yeah, that'll be a while." He turned around and kicked me off the bench near the extinguished fire. I sat up and looked at him, annoyed. He smirked and reached forward. He opened the door to his staircase. It was bright outside, and for the first time, I could see the room. It wasn't as big as I imagined it to be. It was very small. I got up and walked groggily to the door. I opened it and immediately closed my eyes. It was very bright. I walked up the gray stairs to the empty road. Jones was standing in the middle of the street, waiting in the cold air for me. The entire city was so ashy and gray. I walked next to him and shivered. It suddenly became very cold. I crossed my arms and stood next to him. "I'm shocked," he said, while continuing to look down the street at the gray buildings. "At what?" I asked. "I'm surprised you haven't noticed," he said. He turned to me. "You've been asleep for around 2 days. "Nah, there's no way. I would have woken up or at least had a dream, right?" I asked. "Guess not. Your body's been deprived of sleep so much, then, I guess," he said. I raised my eyebrows in shock and looked down the street. Why did you bring me out here? I was about to say, he said at the same time. Follow me, he said. He started to walk down the street, but I stayed put. He stopped and held out a fluffy winter jacket. It was slightly torn, but it was so welcomed. I ran to him and put it on. We started to walk together in the cold gray street. We stopped in front of a massive building. There were tall, dead palm trees in the front of the building. On the sign facing the road at the front of the building, it read in gray letters, Four Seasons Hotel, Las Vegas. I recognized this place. The place where I started my work with Sylvie and the place where I was hunted down by police officers. We continued inside. As we walked inside the building, I noticed gray flecks of ash falling from above, somewhere, almost like it was snowing. We walked to the elevator. I pressed the button and it lit up red. Meanwhile, Jones opened the door to the stairs. You think that'll work? He said. Hopefully, I said confidently. I don't want to walk up. I'm tired. All right then, I'll see you at the... He started, but the elevator dinged and opened. I stepped inside of the rickety elevator and asked, You were saying? He rolled his eyes and walked into the elevator. I shuffled to my left and made room for him. He pressed a button covered in dust and the doors closed. I smirked as I saw him slowly shake his head in the corner of my eye. We got to the floor and the elevator opened. The doors opened to reveal a long gray hallway with icicles on the roof. We walked through the piles of ash. He turned when we reached room 101, and we stopped. I rolled my eyes. What a boring number. It's always the same, I thought to myself. He lifted his leg. I watched lazily as he miserably failed to kicking it open. He continued to kick it as I eventually put my hands into my cozy pockets, laid back against the wall, and simply watched in amusement. After a bunch of kicks, he stopped and slumped over, a tired old man. He spun his head around at me. Do you mind? He said angrily. I chuckled. I walked forward and raised my leg. Step back, I said quietly. What? He asked for clarification. Step back, I said again louder. He quickly backed away in awe and watched with interest. I looked over at him. You ready? I started. Yes, he said without hesitation, but calmed himself down. Yes, I am. Just open the door. I smiled and raised my leg. His mouth dropped in awe. I immediately dropped my leg back down and stepped forward to the door. I placed my hand on the door handle and simply opened it. The door slowly creaked open to a large, dull room. I turned back around at him. He stared at me in utter disappointment. I waved my hands for him to go in, but he stayed still. Finally, he walked in very slowly. As he passed me, I whispered, You're welcome. He snorted, and I walked in after him. I shut the door behind me and looked around. What I thought was that the room would be filled with junk like it usually was when I last remembered it. I guess that's because I knew the exact room. How could I forget? It's always been the same number for my room. Anyway, this room was clean. It was like there were no loose items anywhere in the city. He walked to the bedroom and grabbed the red cube. He walked back to me and dropped it on the ground. It made a loud thud. I said with no energy at all. Interesting piece of, equipment you got there. It's not like I've seen it before or anything. You've seen this before? He asked me. I turned around and started pacing around the room. Well, I first saw it when you left it in the Thanatos. Yeah, bet that's a name you haven't heard in a while, I said. I heard it from a version of Electos the other day. He started, but I cut him off. Then, it appeared on this very table here when Sylvie brought it to me many years ago in a program, I said as I placed my hand on the table in the living room. Wait, what? He started again, but I once again continued explaining. Then, I saw it in a bunch of nightmares from the year 2033 to 2037, which haunted me, I said. And now, I said as I stopped pacing, it's here. I don't know how it's been traveling across the multiverse, but I hate it. I really, really hate that cube, I said as I pulled out a chair from the table in the kitchen and slumped down on it. I stared gloomily at Jones as he thought about what to say. He eventually walked up to me and bent down. He looked me in the eyes and said, What if you could embrace the chaos? He said. I looked up at him with the same intent to learn more. I ran down the main street in downtown Colorado Springs and watched the people still staring up at the red sky. Everyone was very confused about why the air around them was red and why there was a giant crack in the sky. Some people were coughing. I ran into the nearest library. The building was empty. I looked around and finally saw the public computers. I took the disc from my chest and started running to the computer while the suit slid off me. Once the suit was completely off, I held the disc and continued running to the computers. I finally reached the empty computers and went behind it. I ripped out the wires from the computer and went back in front of it. I grabbed a cable and plugged it into the disc where my suit was. The disc turned red, and the screen of the computer started to turn on. It was still weird seeing a computer turn on with nothing connected to it, but I had done it so many times, so I knew what would happen. The computer turned on, and instead of being taken to a login screen, I was taken to a dark screen. The program slowly started to boot up, and I eventually was taken into the program. This was the life program, but not quite what it seemed. First off, it showed a small screen surrounded by a lot of code. On the small screen was a two-dimensional view of the environment called the life program by Rai. Since he was always busy and never came back to check on what happened, I controlled the program. On the screen, I saw some red code appear. I let it go through and didn't even try to stop it. It was followed by a white flash. Of course, that was Rai. I started to watch the interaction between Rai and Oscar in the program and got bored. I pressed the fast forward button on the keyboard and it sped up. I stopped when I reached Oscar, turning into a monster. Here we are, I mumbled to myself. I watched as Oscar started attacking Rai. I had seen this a bunch of times. It was so entertaining. But I was looking forward to what happened after when Rai came back. I pressed the full screen button on the small screen and it widened to fit the entire screen. I slid the mouse over to the left side of the screen and pressed the arrow. It moved me to a view of another version of Rai and Sylvie running across the program. I clicked on them and typed in the words, follow. My view from where I was watching on the computer started to follow them as they ran. I tilted my view now and then to see how much longer they had. As I watched them run, I saw another white flash. I stopped following them and waited to see who had appeared. This had never happened before. I watched a young man stand up and look around. He had a white shirt and black pants. I couldn't see his face at first, but I eventually saw it. Rai. I watched as he went to a fake bar and sat down. He got a drink and watched as the other Rai and Sylvie ran by him. They looked at each other. He stood up and watched as the world crumbled away. He stood still, but eventually figured out that something was wrong, that he needed to do something. He looked back at the other version of himself. The code on the side of the screen in the foreground of my view started to fade into green. Maybe this was supposed to happen. Maybe he was supposed to die and the program would finally close. But then he started running. Blinded by making things right, he continued running. The red words flashed on my screen saying, anomaly detected. This code immediately turned red and started moving more violently around the screen. I growled and clenched my fists in anger as he ran faster and faster, but I eventually saw him fall. I watched as he fell into the void and eventually disappeared. I waited for the program to say something about what had happened. Suddenly, it said, subject status, alive. I smashed my hands on the keyboard and shattered the keys. I screamed in anger and punched the screen. It flew back and shattered when it hit the wall behind it. I grabbed the disc and placed it on my chest. How? I screamed in my mind. How is he alive? So once my suit formed, I equipped my helmet and kicked open the library doors. Outside were a bunch of cops. Some other people had probably seen me leaving the school. Hands up, one of the cops said. I scowled at them from under my helmet and slowly reached for my sword. Don't, they warned, but I was done taking orders from anyone. I grabbed my sword and flung it at the cop. It went through his chest and he flew back to a cop car, blood bleeding out of him. He made a dent in the side of the car from his impact. I left my hand outstretched and the sword flew back to me. Fire! Another cop said. They raised their guns and fired, but I was ready like I always was. Sylvie told me her story when she woke up, Jones said. I continued to listen. She said that she injected the red liquid from this box into her body and was transported into another reality. If all of these important realities are truly important, then there could be a slim chance that I could get to where she is, I finished. Exactly. Also, she seems to have a problem. She seems to imagine the worst in everything. She told me how she thought she saw one of her old friends just kill a bunch of people, but it never really happened, so... Anyway, Sylvie still has 2 syringes of the red liquid, but if you need more, you could always use this, he said. I nodded. This could just be enough to work. I could still have a chance to make things right in my life. All right, let's do it, I told Jones. He nodded and I grabbed the cue. We walked out of the room, but before leaving, I turned back around. I heard the creaking of something. Jones walked out into the hallway, but I went toward the glass. I felt around the window and eventually felt it. I felt the shattered glass from the time when my fake associate named Rodrigo resigned. I was so mad because I was told to believe the lie that we did all of our work for something. "You coming?" Jones yelled from the hallway. I kept my eyes peeled on the glass and eventually backed out of the room. Jones looked at me and continued walking down the hallway. Eventually, we walked back onto the cold street. It felt like there was no warmth here at all. We walked in silence, but I finally thought of something to say. "Oh, I've been meaning to ask you. Where are all of the people that you mentioned that were brought here? Like Sky, Night, and all of the other weird names like yours." "They're gone," he said. "Wait, they're gone? Like, gone? I asked. "Yeah. They couldn't stand the pain of eternal suffering, so they jumped off a building," he explained. I stared down at the ground in front of me, not wanting to know more. I didn't know that what I had done would cause major consequences like that. We eventually made it back to the dark room. We walked down the stairs and went to Sylvie. Jones shook Sylvie awake, and she opened her eyes for the first time in a while. "Huh?" she said, looking around. "It's okay, Jones started. "Did you tell him?" Sylvie asked. "Yeah, I was about to tell you that," Jones said. They both looked at me, standing stupidly in my oversized wintered coat and watching them. "Are you ready?" Jones asked Sylvie. She nodded. "All right, here we go. Up you get," he said as he helped Sylvie up. She grabbed the syringes from her pocket and gave one to me. I nodded at her, and she nodded back at me. We both smiled. "Thank you for saving me from there," her soft voice said. "No, it's nothing. We gotta try and save everyone, right?" I replied. "Right," she said. It felt so long since I had met a calm Sylvie, not one who would betray me or just die on me. We both smiled at each other as I felt something that I hadn't felt in a long time. "Come on, lovebirds," Jones said, interrupting my thoughts. I rolled my eyes. He was already halfway up the stairs. "You've got a multiverse to save." Once we were outside the dark room, Sylvie and I stood in front of Jones. Sylvie took out a more damaged and dusty syringe from her pocket. This one was empty. I handed Jones the cube and he tossed it up in the air. It landed and smashed open. The red liquid started to steep out of the box. Jones took the empty syringe from Sylvie and sucked the liquid into it. Sylvie did the same thing to mix the liquid to get the right destination. I did the same. Once we were all ready, Sylvie and I injected ourselves with the liquid. We both fell to the ground as we started to vanish from that universe. Jones moved to put the liquid to his body, but we heard a crackling behind us. Behind us, we could see a bright web. I tried to say something to Jones, but I was already half gone from that reality. His eyes widened as I slowly started to close my eyes. Before I closed my eyes, I heard Jones say, "Protect her." A monster jumped from the web behind me onto Jones. The monster started to maul Jones alive, tearing him limb for limb. Sylvie screamed, and I watched in horror, unable to do anything. The monster turned to us. It had a white stripe across its eyes. It leaped at us with long, bloody teeth, but we vanished, right in time. This episode was recorded by Tristan Kumar. If you enjoyed this, make sure to check out the next part, of course. And thank you so much for all the support you've given me. And anyway, check out the next parts. Thank you so much. Bye.